Good day, everyone. Welcome to the webinar, Simultaneously Building a Strong Relationship with Commercial Insurance Payers and Differentiating Your Treatment Program, Infinity Behavioral IBCN Certificate of Compliance. My name is Andrew Martin. I am with the Behavioral Health Association of Providers. BHAP, as we affectionately call it, is a national trade membership association that provides education and advocacy for behavioral healthcare providers and related entities such as yourself. Membership in BHAP provides confidence that providers are informed about compliance with changing legal regulations and industry best practices, while reinforcing provider reputation within a network of ethical business practitioners. Our educational and certificate opportunities, such as this webinar, and the CATM, Certificate in Addiction Treatment Marketing, build your skills with higher level learning designed for providers interested in ethical business practices and regulatory compliance, and informing prospective consumers of the dedication the provider exhibits toward honest business practices. Finally, our advocacy efforts encourage industry involvement and self-regulation by informing providers of legislative activity that will promote state and federal rules and regulations that benefit providers and those suffering from behavioral health illness. You can get much more information on our website at bhap.us. Now, before we begin this seminar, a few housekeeping details for those of you joining us for the first time. You will be able to hear us, but we will not be able to hear you. That's because we're recording these webinars so you have access to them later on if you need them. However, if you have questions or concerns, you can communicate with us by using the chat room, and that's located on the lower left side of your screen. You don't need to wait until the end for questions. You can just type it in there whenever you'd like, and we will address those questions throughout the webinar or at the end. Now, we will also be sending you the PDF of the slides that are used in this webinar, as well as a link to this webinar after the event is completed. And now, it is my pleasure to introduce our presenters today. First, we have Eloy Paez. Eloy Paez is the CEO of Infinity Behavioral Health Services, the behavioral health industry's leading revenue cycle management company. With over 20 years of experience in the industry, Eloy brings a unique, clinically minded perspective to the revenue cycle management world. And as Infinity's CEO, Eloy develops and manages strategic relationships and drives internal growth and innovation. As a clinician, Eloy was accustomed to the challenges insurance companies presented to providers seeking reimbursement for their services, and the impact that had on both providers and their patients. Eloy holds a BA in Organizational Leadership from St. Thomas University and an MS in Counselor Education, Clinical Mental Health from Florida International University. Also joining us today is Max Sirianni. He is the General Counsel and Chief Compliance Officer for Infinity Behavioral Health Services. As in-house counsel for Infinity, Max provides comprehensive internal representation for Infinity, including keeping Infinity ahead of an ever-changing legal landscape for behavioral health care, developing strategic partnerships for growth, and directing activities to limit risk and maintain compliance. Max graduated from Georgetown University's Law School in 2013, and he is admitted to the practice in Florida and Colorado. Prior to his position at Infinity, Max worked as a public defender in Colorado, where he represented defendants in many jury trials and hundreds of contested judicial hearings. Finally, I'll be joining you today. Once again, my name is Andrew Martin, and I am the Chief Operating Officer at Behavioral Health Association of Providers. I have experience in the addiction treatment industry dating back to 2005, including founding and operating Serene Scene magazine, launching the Evolution of Addiction Treatment Conference, as well as developing LocateTreatment.com. I also founded and operated a 36-bed transitional sober living and outpatient treatment facility in Long Beach, California, called Serene Center. So I want to welcome you all to this webinar, and hand this over to Max and Eloy.
So I was just saying thank you, everyone, for being in attendance, and thank you for the kind introduction. Kind of given the background about what BHAP does and what Infinity does, we're going to talk a little bit more about what IBCN does here today, and that kind of fills in the gap and kind of bridges the gap between the two organizations and why we partnered together to put forward this concept and this product and what the need in the industry that we think it fills is. So just want to move ahead a slide. What is IBCN? So IBCN is a product that fills a gap between payers and providers. Here at Infinity, we sit at the intersection of the two. We are obviously working hard to represent our clients and to do the best that we can for them in terms of their reimbursement and their day-to-day billing. But we're also working with payers every day, and we have a lot of insight into what they want, what issues they care about in terms of billing and compliance, as well as kind of where their head's at in terms of the industry more broadly. That experience and that perspective kind of led us to the idea of IBCN, because there's quite frankly a big gulf between payers and providers. Part of that is built into the reimbursement system that we have itself. We have a fee-for-service system, where generally, we bill out for the service that we provide, whatever it is, one day or one therapy session, and, the payer reimburses that. Usually we have to get authorization for that if it's a higher level of care, which means kind of fighting for that extra day, fighting for that extra authorization, debating whether the patient needs to step down, and all these kind of things that create tension between payers and providers that are really built into the system that we have. But we don't think that it has to be. And the IBCN idea is to kind of break down some of that tension that's built into the system between payers and providers. We're going to assume that at the end of the day, both payers and providers want the same thing, which is, good care for the patient, at a reasonable cost. And we're working to situate the two rather than continually fighting, so that their interests are more aligned. I'm going to let Eloy speak to a little bit more behind the concept of it.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Max and Andrew, for that kind introduction. And as Max said, really the priority and kind of the goals behind IBCN comes after many years of conversations with payers. Even as we were wrapping up our certificate program, their feedback was very valuable in what these concepts really consisted of. And the reality is that payers recognize and want most of the providers, or if not all of the providers, to be nationally accredited, either via CARF or the Joint Commission. But payers do feel that along with state standards somewhat are minimal, and they'd like to see just a higher emphasis on policies and treatment and just more accountability on the payer side, and most importantly, more transparency. Here at Infinity, as well as on the payer side, we often hear providers say how their clinical is better than someone else's, their results are better than someone else's, and clients don't get this. Oftentimes when we ask and facts around that, providers haven't been able to. How's this? Is this better?
Much better.
Okay,
yes.
That's a little better now. Yeah.
Can you guys hear me? Yeah, perfect. So,
if you could
Andrew, when did it start breaking up so I can kind of backtrack here?
Are what their needs are, what they're really looking for, in addition to just the credentialing of the likes of Joint Commission or or CARF.
Perfect. Yeah, perfect. So, but really, payers, want that transparency. They want to know that their members are doing well. Providers oftentimes state that their clinical philosophies and their outcomes are better than other providers around the nation. But the issue really lies in everybody having a difficult time in really documenting such services. So, after many years of debate with payers, we concluded that, one of the things that will be very beneficial, not only for advantageous contracts with payers, but also for just accountability and transparency between the two, would really be an independent audit by a third party. This independent audit is similar to what you would experience with the Joint Commission or CARF, but as part of our certificate that is offered on an annual basis. Unfortunately, we see a lot of our providers sometimes struggle with their Joint Commission or CARF audits, really rush to kind of prepare, and the stability around the operations is only during that interim. And payers really recognized this and wanted to really, bridge that gap and make it something that's more accountable. So with the IBCN certificate, that audit is done every year. We look at different segments of the provider, and the results of that audit are shared with the provider, along with any objectives that were learned and any corrective actions that were identified. That is also shared with Infinity as well. And that will be shared with contracts that are to come with certain payers that are asking for this level of transparency, so they know what their members are doing at all times. We think that's going to make for a more transparent relationship. It's going to hold everybody accountable. It's going to be a safer and better environment for the patient, which is really what every good provider and every payer should aim to be at. The second aspect of that is really a patient survey and a tool that makes sense. We really want a way for our providers to be able to gauge what the patients are saying about them in an unbiased fashion. How do they compare across other treatment centers in the nation? So we have been able to partner with CARF, and we're using their patient survey tool, and they're going to have the ability to survey up to 150 patients a year. For a provider that has multiple sites, whether it be in the same state or in different states, they can see what those patients are saying in comparison to themselves. They can also see what those patients are saying in comparison to Infinity customers that are taking part of the program. And more significantly, they can see across CARF. This is going to be a very valuable tool because it will allow the provider an opportunity to know how they compare against the rest, but more importantly, it will give us contracting leverage with the payers. We do recognize that some of the rates that payers are pushing forward for a network contract are unsustainable, and most treatment centers, in order for them to be ran profitably and at the level that payers would want to see, those rates need to be higher. And this is part of what's going to get us there. And this is part of some documentation for us to prove what's working versus not, and most importantly, what's the client population saying about you as a provider. And before I go on to the next thing, it's very important. Providers, it's been my experience, and I've been in the industry since '96 and in the for-profit part of the business since 2003. The reality is that there's a lot of members that need treatment. Whether that's at the outpatient level of care or at the inpatient level of care. The opiate epidemic is a real thing. There's folks that are in need of treatment. There's a lot of competition to get those clients to a credible and to a good provider. Unfortunately, at times those clients end up in a bad provider, and I think it's our responsibility here at Infinity and all of the good providers across the nation to really embrace some of these tools and separate themselves from some of these folks that are just painting a negative image on our industry and go above and beyond to show payers that the reason why we're asking for these contracted amounts and the reason why we have an engaged alumni group, and it's because of all of these steps that we're taking to show not only our clients that what we're doing is work, but it's very important to kind of gauge their feedback. This helps a great deal from an alumni perspective. You keep your members engaged in treatment. The longer engagement stays, the less they are likely to readmit. This is not only very important for helpers like myself, but also for payers, because readmission is both costly and then very dangerous. So I don't want providers to just kind of take the IBCN certificate as a way that they're just being held more accountable and we're giving payers more of what they want. That is something that we're going to accomplish by it, but the reality is that accountability and that patient engagement is going to make you better. You're going to deliver better care, and you're going to be at your patient's fingertips for when they're not doing well and for when they possibly need to readmit, which we all know in the provider space is a very delicate conversation, something that's very important to the survival of providers across the country. The last part of that is that we have partnered with Trigger. It's a case management tool that essentially picks up on algorithms to predict changes in behavior that are likely to lead to relapse. One of the things that I have found that providers struggle with the most throughout my career is just knowing what that alumni network is doing and how are they doing. Are they following through with the aftercare plan? And where's their recovery at that moment? I do think it's very important for providers to have a robust case management division as part of their organization to monitor this alumni. Oftentimes payers have tried to do something similar to this, but have really struggled on the delivery because they don't have the contact and the relationship with the client that we do as a provider. And the other aspect of that is our contact with the client is lifelong. The payer's contact with the client is while they're a client. So providers should really benefit from looking at that differently than payers, and more engagement from that alumni network is not only going to provide better results as far as recovery, but it's also going to provide for a stronger alumni network. You're going to be in tune with what your alumni are struggling with and what they're not, and what you can help them with in a time of need, and not start that vicious cycle all over again. One of the things that as a clinician I don't like to see, and payers, especially the major payers across the nation, really agree on this, is we need stronger and more sustainable continuity of treatment. What worked last time? What needs to be different? What did we learn? What mistakes happened? The Trigger case management app really allows for this. What gaps of the aftercare plan are not working the way we had intended, and the client is struggling as a result? So we should have an intervention. Maybe that client comes in for an individual session. Maybe that client comes in for a group. Maybe that client comes in for a family session. You retool the aftercare process for that client. That client goes, back out into the community, and you continue to kind of manage what's working and what's not. One of the things that I have access to here at Infinity is that I see clients hopping from treatment center to treatment center all across the country. As many as several dozen admissions throughout the course of the year. And when you kind of dig into the clinical details, you see so many things missed between the variety of assessments or aftercare plans, treatment plan objectives similar to a previous stay that weren't effective. By you being able to kind of have some engagement in your alumni and monitoring what's working versus what's not, you're not only going to stay engaged in that relationship, which will help with your admissions process when and if that individual needs help, of course, decrease cost of acquisition, which in our industry is very costly and continues to escalate over time. But you can make a significant impact in the care of the individual. And, oftentimes we have business folks coming into our industry without a clinical mindset. I do think it's very important that everything starts with the client and the clinical mindset. I think everything else follows after that point. The reality is that we're in the helping profession, and that is key. So we have really worked very hard for the last couple of years here with our clients, with payers, and with different, feedback from patients across the nations, just with our experience, to put something in place that has systems to kind of cover all concerns, really marry, the payer and the provider, provide excellent treatment with monitored and documented outcomes on how the client is doing, to be able to allow us to really go to the national payers across the nation, different employer groups, and let them know that we are holding our clients to this standard. We have this network of providers that are hundreds and hundreds across the nation in over 20 states that are not only willing to give you the transparency and the accountability that no other provider is looking to do, but a place where their members and their employees are going to be treated properly. They're going to be engaged in the process, and that is going to be better for their organizations. And that's really going to be the difference here. And the larger employer groups across the nation, I can tell you, are severely impacted by the loss of work and performance due to treatment episodes and a variety of behavioral health issues within their workforce. One of the main objectives of the IBCN certificate is to really overcome that for these employers. They look at it differently than payers, and that's the other aspect of this. Payers are looking at the care of the members and the financial impact based on what their numbers tell them. Employers want their members and their members' family happy and healthy at reasonable costs for them to be able to show up to work and perform as they are needed. And I strongly feel that we're in the early stages of the IBCN certificate and speaking to many payers across the nation, as well as different employer groups. But that is going to be the difference in this certificate, and just the transparency and the accountability. So we're really in a place where I welcome treatment centers across the nation to really just hold themselves to a different standard. The costs are very minimal. I know firsthand we have some providers that pay anywhere between 5 to 10 times what these costs are just for an audit component, not for the 3 components that it is that we're using. And better things are going to come as a result. This is going to eventually help with admissions process, sustainable relationships directly with payers and with employer groups at very reasonable costs, where we can continue to be helpers and do it at a profit without the stress of special investigations, pre- and post-payment reviews, and very costly scrutiny on behalf of the payer. I'll turn it over to Max now to kind of fill in the blanks.
Not only the IBCN, but also in just the best functioning of a provider's business. And Eloy, you spoke to many best practices and resources available to providers so that they can operate a business as efficiently as possible and provide the best treatment possible, which of course matters to all parties involved, not only the provider, but of course to the patient and their families, and of course to the payers who are paying for the treatment of these individuals. And that's all well and good, but where the IBCN really fits in here is with regard to developing a solid relationship between the payer and the provider. Now, Max and I were both at the TCIV conference in Scottsdale last month, and Max was on a panel of insurance payers that were up there, and I'm sure he can speak to this, but the word relationship was used numerous times. And how do you build a relationship with an insurance payer? That's a difficult thing to do. And the core of the IBCN to me is that it is a launching pad and a buttress for that relationship between the provider and the insurance payer.
Yeah, Andrew, that's spot on. And listen, the reality is that there's different advantages to the program. To some providers and some individuals, some are going to be more important than others, and there's many reasons as to why we've gone down this road as another business line for us as an organization. And I can tell you the first aha moment I had as an individual is when I was continuing to attempt meaningful contracts with payers. Payers would continue to ask me for these things. None of our providers had the time or the means to put this level of sophistication forward. Contract negotiations would go nowhere. But also on the employer side, most of the employers and the plans across the nation are self-funded. And, when I was a provider, I relied on key employers across the nation for my admissions, whether they be unions or very large employer groups. And I can tell you that employer groups, and we forget about these folks. We think the provider and we think the payer. Nobody oftentimes, we ignore the employer who is the one that's paying that payer to manage that benefit and to make sure that their members are being treated properly in treatment. So we have everybody worried about what their revenue streams are and what their numbers are, but few take into consideration what kind of impact is happening at the employer. And you're 100% correct, Andrew, when you say that we are now in a position to go to the largest employer groups in the nation, conversations of which we have already begun, and saying we have hundreds and hundreds of providers across the nation. This is the standard they're holding themselves to, in addition to state licensure and national accreditation. We're willing to participate in a transparent relationship with you, and our best interest here is in servicing your members so they can get to work. So we're really going to bypass the bureaucracy that exists now. In a very favorable way. This is potentially going to lead in a reduction in cost of acquisition. This is going to increase admissions across the board for providers across the nation. And this is just the beginning. We've already signed our first agreement on the front side of the IBCN certificate, which is neither a payer or an employer group, but essentially a provider that has tens of thousands of clients. And part of their struggle when they reached out to us, we don't know where to send our clients because we hear all these terrible things about Florida, and we hear all these terrible things about California, and we hear all these terrible things that are going on in Texas, and everybody's like picking and choosing all of these states, and we don't know what to do with them. They didn't have the means to put forward the compliance plan that we have with all these segments to give them some peace of mind that where they're going to refer their members to, they're going to be able to see what's going on. They're going to be tracked. ASAM criteria is going to be followed, and it's going to be something that's going to be meaningful for their members. Many employers feel that way, and I think that this is going to shed some new light onto what relationships are going to be to come. We realize that we're the first ones at this level, especially for an RCM company, to talk about this. But this is going to be the way of treatment in years to come. There's going to be direct contracting. There's going to be case rates. The more patients do better, the more you're going to get reimbursed. And we didn't want to wait for that to happen in order for us to develop our compliance plan. We really wanted to initiate that conversation and just kind of bypass, years of scrutiny and problems. And, whatever payers don't want to talk to us, our solution is simple. We're going to go straight to the employer because it is the employer's money. And I can tell all of you on this conference right now that they listen at a different level than payers listen. And we now have their attention, and we're bringing something to all of these unions and all these large employer groups across the nation that nobody has ever thought to bring to them. We're going to bring you to the process. We're going to be transparent about it, and we're going to care for your member in order for them to be able to perform for you and be healthy the way you'd like them to be. So, Andrew, I don't know if you had anything to piggyback on that, but I'll turn it over to Max now.
Thanks, Eloy. Since I'm the attorney on the call, I'll do my not fun attorney thing and kind of talk about how we got here. Eloy and Andrew obviously already touched on this, but we've gotten in the position that we've been in with the tension between payers and providers, largely because of payer perceptions, which are shaped by, like any other perceptions, a combination of the interaction with providers, negative experience, the way that things are portrayed in the media, in some cases by law enforcement, some obviously baked in biases just from the perspective of being payers, and also some misunderstanding and knowledge gaps about the treatment industry coming from the physical healthcare space. We could do a whole webinar on all of these, but just to talk a little bit, I mean, we are all aware that there has been, incredible increase in the coverage of the opioid epidemic and the current issues with the industry. Some of that's been positive, some of that's been unfortunately negative, and there's been an outsized amount of attention, on a few unscrupulous providers in the media that have really focused on, the bad actors on the industry rather than the good actors in the industry. And that definitely has shaped the narrative about the care being provided in behavioral healthcare, to the detriment of everyone. We've also seen law enforcement, step up action against providers, particularly here in Florida where we're headquartered. We have a Sober Homes Task Force, which, has done a lot of good work in terms of prosecuting some folks who were, committing fraud and committing, essentially human trafficking, but also, for anyone that's on interview with the district attorney that leads the task force, also have kind of trying to thrown out the baby with the bathwater when it comes to providers here in South Florida, which again is unfortunate for all the kind of positive providers in our industry. Those are sort of the more, affirmative things that have been done, but there's also just some basic misunderstanding. The insurance companies are always trying to analogize everything to physical medicine, when really, for anyone that works, in behavioral healthcare, actually providing care, knows that there are obviously a lot of similarities. It's still healthcare, but, it really is a different service that's being provided to the patients, and that it really does take a more holistic approach and a more holistic look at the patient and meeting the patient's needs under a much broader, in many cases, set of dimensions. And they've really struggled with that and what that means in terms of providing care. So all those things have contributed to difficulty with with payers from the provider perspective in our industry. And what they're doing, is a number of different things, right? They do increase medical record demands. They require more auditing, which leads to recoupment. They have create sort of a labyrinthian sets of complex coding and medical necessity requirements, and they make it very difficult to access payer networks and have reduced contracting opportunity. Now, some of this is just endemic to healthcare in this country, but there's definitely an outsized portion of it in our industry, and that is due to a lot of these misunderstandings and negative perceptions, and all these things here can lead to impact in being able to get coverage for the patient, obviously impact to providers' finances. All of that is a great challenge. It comes from these kind of negative perceptions and misunderstandings. I did see a question in the chat. Are these payers that are potentially participating or are participating with this program? In some cases, yes, because as a revenue cycle management company, I can tell you that pretty much every big payer, in this country does, some of these things. And unfortunately, it does kind of hold some of these biases. And, that just seems to be a function of their, their position as an insurance company. I don't think we've ever dealt with an insurance company that doesn't hold some of these provider biases and some of these, behavioral healthcare biases. The goal of this program is to shift that, to allow them to see the good providers that are in this industry, allow them to have a better understanding of the care that's rendered, allow them to address their concerns directly, rather than exclude them altogether. Because if you excluded every payer that has done something like this, you really wouldn't be left with hardly anyone. It does go to something Eloy was discussing before, though, about also trying to talk to the self-funded plans themselves, in addition to the plan administrators, as they are a little bit more closely connected with the patients and a little more sympathetic to some of these things. I think Eloy wants to jump in here.
Yeah, and I'll let Max continue on, but I just wanted to kind of address that question. And I can tell you that, so we have, for the better part of a year and change now, been speaking to the major payers across the nation, right? And when I say the major payers, obviously for anybody on the line that's a CMS provider, CMS is the largest payer in the nation. Second to that, we have the Blues, which are state specific. And, depending on the state, they are the largest or second largest. We have Optum and the affiliates, and then Aetna and Cigna. And I can tell you that they've been very involved in us developing the certificate. A lot of their feedback was taken into consideration. And when we first went to them and said, we're going to do a different type of compliance audit, and it's going to be more frequent than what the Joint Commissioner CARF does, they were like, great, but what else? Then we said, well, we're going to survey patients, and we're going to make that available for anybody in a contracted relationship to see. And they said, great, what else? And really the last thing that they wanted was really, these alumni tools and how to stay engaged with the patient and monitor those patients. So our goal within the IBCN certificate is to contract directly with the payers and to contract directly with self-funded groups, EAPs, and employers across the nation. Though the one question that our providers have when I say that is, at what rate, right? Sometimes I'm asked, I hear it's very difficult to get contracts, and so can get contracts, and they do it easily. Well, it's very easy for everybody to be in a contracted relationship with a payer. The trick is, what is the rate going to be? Because if you call the payer and you stay right now and they say the network is closed, and you said, yeah, but I want to offer intensive outpatient treatment for $40 a day per diem. Trust me, you're going to get a contract relatively quickly. That's not what we're trying to do here. So what we've done in order to prepare for these conversations is that we have been analyzing our data over the past couple of years, and we have by state what out-of-network reimbursement is, by level of care, by payer. And those are the rates that we are using to negotiate this. So we're not going to our providers and saying, we want you to be held to a higher standard. We want you to be better. And what you're going to get in return is going to be absolutely nothing. No, we're going to our providers and we are saying, we want you to be held to this new standard. You are going to incur these fees, but this is going to allow for better communication with payers. This is going to allow for better communication with self-funded groups, EAPs, unions, and large employer groups across the nation, and they're going to deal directly with you as a result. And that's really what this is going to enable us to do. Two payers that we have spoken to since the development and our press release of the certificate. Now, when we're engaged in a conversation, they always go out of their way and say, one of them is the largest payer in the nation, says, is this provider involved in your new certificate, right? So we don't have a contract with them, but they're already placing a different level of legitimacy within that provider once they know they're being held to these different standards. This is the early stages. I anticipate that before this year is over, we're going to have a variety of contracts, mainly with employer groups and EAPs. And I would suspect that we're going to have several with payers as well. And it's just going to grow from here. My end goal as a CEO of Infinity is really to position ourselves in a way where when you become an Infinity customer, we're a revenue cycle management company. But we don't look at our business just as revenue cycle management. To me, our business starts at the provider level. Everything good that happens at Infinity is as a result of everything good that's happening at a provider. So I view part of my job enriching the opportunity at the provider level and making sure that they provide good treatment is going to pave the way for my organization to continue to grow and be successful in the long run. And this is the stability and the predictability that the IBCN certificate is bringing on board, because fast forward 3 to 5 years down the road, most, if not all, of the Infinity customers are going to be contracted with payers, employer groups, EAPs, and such across the nation. The marketing stress that everybody lives under today is going to be minimized. Because there's going to be a direct referral relationship between those groups and the providers, but our providers are going to be held to a different standard. Not only do I think that's right for the patients, but we are taking on a great deal of responsibility by saying our providers are better than any other providers across the nation. These are the reasons why they're better. I'm sure there's going to be many variations of the IBCN certificate, and it's going to morph into something that's more complex than it is today. But that's really the goal here. I want all of Infinity's customers to be contracted at rates that make sense for everybody, and just cut the hassle and all of the issues that we're having in that relationship, that at the end of the day, regardless how we want to phrase it or how anybody wants to think about it, is impacting the one person's life we're trying to impact the most, which is the client in treatment. And that's the predictability and the stability that the IBCN certificate is going to bring. So we do have one relationship now on the front end of the certificate. I anticipate there's going to be more to come. And I can tell you that payers are already trying to, already asking which clients have opted into the certificate and which have not. So I'll turn it back to Max, and hopefully that answers your question.
Thanks, Eloy. And I'm gonna kind of speed through the next section because I want to be conscious of everyone's time and leave a couple of minutes for questions at the end. The next couple of sections, just kind of continuing on some of the issues, that we've had with payers, and how those kinds of things come about, kind of talked about how the solution we're offering, addresses those. We see that payer audits come about from running data analysis, reviewing medical records and documentation, from specific provider demographics that they're concerned about, such as, certain geographic regions, and actually talking to patients via survey or phone call or written communication. All those are ways that payers are going out on their own and investigating providers, and resulting in audits and flags and things of that nature. The biggest issues we've seen that payers have raised are documentation issues, billing issues, and also patient responsibility, laboratory issues, and of course marketing and kickback type issues. Those kind of things can result in audits, which can result in anything from, overpayment and recoupments, which is what we see most commonly, to, network termination, civil litigation, and even rarely, criminal or regulatory action. I think we've talked a lot about kind of how the solution corrects these issues. It helps by correcting the perception problem on the payer side. It identifies high quality providers, in ways that audits do not, and offers a higher degree of transparency. It allows high quality providers to stand out from their peers. Since most providers don't offer this level of compliance and transparency, and allows for the kind of relationship and a more trusting relationship, between the payer and the provider. So that the next slide is kind of the nuts and bolts about how this all works. So I was going to turn over to Andrew to kind of talk about the functional process within it and what the next steps would be.
Thank you, Max. The IBCN is it is an audit sort of a process, but it is a fairly simple process. So I'd like to just go through and give people an idea, a general overview of kind of what to expect and how we work the IBCN. So what happens is when somebody engages in the IBCN Certificate of Compliance process, the first thing that will occur is one of our BHAP professionals will audit all of the operational documentation and systems of the provider. Now that audit will then result in a comprehensive report of findings and compliance with the IBCN standards. So the report findings are the basis, so to speak, on which the IBCN Certificate of Compliance badge and certificate would be issued. Now, there may be some corrective actions required. So if there are corrective actions required, what will happen is the auditor will send over a list, basically, of a checklist of corrective actions that need to be satisfied before the IBCN Certificate of Compliance can be issued. Now, BHAP and Infinity can also provide help. We can provide consultation to assist in corrective actions if needed, if they're very complicated, or if there's some regulation or law or standard that perhaps the provider doesn't understand or is new to the provider. We can assist with those things. Also, we can provide these refresher audits and the reissuance of the IBCN Certificate of Compliance on an annual basis, as Eloy mentioned early on in this webinar. Now, why the IBCN really carries with it a great deal of weight is because the whole process is backed by BHAP and also Nelson Hardiman, one of the nation's largest behavioral healthcare law firms. So the knowledge that we have of the law and the regulation and compliance is just, it's unsurpassed within the industry, that's for sure. So like I say, it's a fairly simple process to undertake. It's a matter of just placing an order, and that order generates then a request that an audit professional be assigned to the case. The audit professional contacts the provider, and away we go. Some people will ask, how long does it take? And it's a difficult question for me to answer because, as you can imagine, it really depends on the provider. We're gathering a bunch of information, documentation from the provider. We issue a checklist right away, and then as fast as they can put together all of that information and get it back to our auditor is going to take a look at that right away. So the whole thing could take as little time as a week, but more likely the process would take 2 to 4 weeks or so to complete in order to get the certificate of compliance issued. So how do they get started? And I'll turn this back over to either Max or Eloy to talk about how to get the process started and get the ball rolling.
So it's pretty straightforward. You visit our website or the BHAP website, I believe, and you just enter your demographic information, and you select the product that you are interested in, and someone will reach out and contact you from there. You can also contact any of us. Our email addresses are on this last page, or by phone, and get more information that way. Or if you need assistance signing up, you can sign up that way. And that's it. So it's a very easy, straightforward registration process. And we have about 7 more minutes. So just wanted to see if anyone has any questions in the chat before we wrap up.
Well, it seems like we must have done a fairly good job. You guys did an excellent job of talking about what the IBCN is and why it will help providers in their relationships with the payers out there and also the employers. So I want to again thank Eloy Paez and Max Sirianni for presenting today the simultaneously building a strong relationship with commercial insurance payers and differentiating your treatment program, the Infinity Behavioral IBCN Certificate of Compliance webinar. Thanks as well to everyone in our audience for participating. And as a reminder, the PDF of this slideshow, along with the link to the presentation video,
Andrew,
will be sent out by email in the next day or two. And we hope that you will be able to join us for future BHAP webinars. This concludes today's webinar, and thank you once again. Oh, I'm sorry, we have a question that just came in last minute, huh? You mentioned being partnered with CARF. Will your audit process also look into Joint Commission compliance? Well, I can answer that one, you guys. The CARF and Joint Commission standards are both covered within the criteria of the IBCN certificate. So these do not, the IBCN will be applicable whether you are CARF or Joint Commission accredited, in other words. Now, CARF and Joint Commission are not superseded by IBCN. IBCN is a supplementary and supportive audit, which is designed very specifically to help with that provider-payer relationship. So it is not an accreditation. It is designed differently than accreditations on purpose. And the reason why the design is such is so that we can go back to payers and to employers and say, look, this organization, this provider business is operating transparently in compliance with all of these rules and regulations and within an ethical boundary that is tier 1 within the industry. So we expect you to have a better relationship with this provider than others in the industry. So that's where IBCN fits in. I'm hoping that answers that question.
Yeah, Andrew, and if I may add a little bit on that question, that's a very good question. So it's as far as Infinity or the IBCN certificate, of course, all of our clients are licensed by the state, and all of our clients also have national accreditation. We have a great relationship with both the Joint Commission and CARF, so whichever one it is you pick, it's fine. As Andrew indicated, this is an additional step. And we evaluated both the Joint Commission and CARF as part of one of our tools that we were going to offer within IBCN. And the reason that we decided to go with CARF was we really liked their USpeak tool, which is the patient survey tool that's going to be a part of the certificate. That's going to be branded to the treatment center. And the other reason, which is really kind of just what made our minds up, was CARF is working very closely with ASAM in order to kind of certify the admission process. ASAM criteria has been out there for many years. Folks are not using it the way that they should. CARF and ASAM recently ventured into a relationship where they're piloting CARF, essentially going into all of the providers that are using ASAM and certifying that they're using ASAM properly. So given that strategic effort on the part of CARF and that they caught the attention of ASAM, which all of our clients use, we felt that was going to be the best fit for their certificate. And since this might become a requirement, across the board from ASAM, we were going to be positioned in our way where it will be beneficial to all of our clients. But to this day, we have a great relationship with the Joint Commission. They've been to our office on numerous occasions. We collaborate on a number of behavioral healthcare issues, as well as issues with our clients on a weekly basis. And hopefully that just kind of adds some more color onto Andrew's explanation.
Okay, super. It seems like we've answered that question, and I don't see any additional questions. So once again, we hope that you found this webinar informative and that you'll join us for future webinars. And for the second time, this now concludes today's webinar.